Hi everybody, my name is Josiah, also known as Chilling Silence. Welcome to another episode of DigiByte and Friends. I'm so glad to have you here. It's been a little while, we've taken a little bit of a hiatus thanks to COVID and other such fun that happens when life throws you curveballs. But I am here joined today by Rich Sanders and Laura Taylor. Thank you both so much for joining me here. If you're not already giving them a follow on Twitter, I would highly recommend it. It's where they both put a lot of their thoughts. I suppose is probably a really good way of phrasing that. And I've been friends with Laura for quite some time now, a couple of years. I've been following Rich now for the last 12 to 18 months, and he's an absolutely fascinating gentleman with a very interesting insights in the industry. Now, if memory serves me right, you've been to Blockchain in the Berg, which was how you originally caught up with Laura Taylor. Is that right? That was a while ago, yeah? Do you want
Yeah,
to
that
talk
was
a little bit
actually
about
some
that,
years ago.
perhaps? Laura, and give us a bit of like an introduction how the two of you got to know each other and the fun that we're going to be discussing today around blockchain analytics as a whole is probably the best way of phrasing it. Yeah.
Sure. I reached out to Rich a little over a year ago to see if he would come and speak at our meetup, and he's got a really wide range of knowledge, and he's local. So he was going to be local, and then COVID hit, so we ended up doing it as a Zoom call. So he was our guest about a year ago, and yeah, we just kind of kept up here and there, touch base and stuff, but that's how we met.
So you were taking meetups for blockchain in the Berg, which is in Pittsburgh,
Yeah,
and Rich came along to speak at one of them. Is that correct?
yeah, yeah.
So do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself then, Rich? What it is that you do as well, and give us a bit of a rundown about what we're going to be talking about today.
Sure. So I'm Rich Sanders. I'm the lead investigator and one of the co-founders of Cypherblade. What we're most well known for in Cypherblade is we investigate scams and hacks. We do a whole array of other stuff too. I spend the majority of my time as an expert witness for law firms on cryptocurrency litigation. We also do like solvency audits and security audits for exchanges, high net worth individuals, and the sort. Yeah, so high level, that's the kind of stuff where I'll end up on Twitter trying to save this industry from itself, and that's how I know you became aware of me. And I also have a highly energetic Siberian retriever that seems to have found a chew toy, so I apologize for that.
No, that's
Um,
fine. That's fine. So you mentioned you've done a lot of expert witness and things. You do blockchain analytics. What got you into this originally? Like, tell us a little bit about some of your history there.
So I'm pretty OG in the crypto space, and I've always believed in this tech as having a ton of potential, and not just within the context of cryptocurrencies and decentralized economy, but I think blockchain technology as a whole has a ton of potential use case. And what's unfortunate about all this, and what really prompted me to get into the space, is that the space as it stands thus far is just so largely underserved, not just by law enforcement to respond to situations. Again, I apologize for that.
That's fine. Don't worry about it, mate.
But it's also just completely underrepresented with folks that want to steer the industry in the right direction, meaning that there's a very notable dichotomy, right? You've got your folks that I'll call the Brad Shermans of government that just don't understand anything about this stuff and want to regulate it into non-existence. And then on the other hand, you have folks within the crypto space that are just operating in such a way that if it's not outright their intention is to be criminally fraudulent, what they're really getting at is they want anarchy. And the reality is really somewhere in between, right? A lot of folks in the blockchain space are kind of libertarian leaning. And if you look at it from that lens, right, the optimal thing for us to do, as you have seen from following me on Twitter, and I know that's why I got your follow, is that the best outcome is if we police ourselves. That's basically what prompted a lot of conversations with Laura and I as well.
Exactly, and in that kind of a vein, this is something that Laura and I were actually talking about earlier. Is it doesn't have to be an all or nothing, and you're absolutely right in terms of being of a libertarian mindset and being progressive there. That's one of the reasons that got me very interested in it. And to begin with, one of the things though that Laura was specifically mentioning was how frustrating it has been to see those polar opposites, and either it's we must have all the regulation or we must have complete liberty and complete freedom. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Laura? You were specifically mentioning how this has impacted your enthusiasm for participation in this space and that kind of thing as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, I get I I understand why people don't want government involved. I mean, I understand that mindset. They don't trust the government. They think government's stupid. They think the government's against them. You
I
know,
mean, we've seen your government, and it speaks for itself. So
yeah. I
just
mean, it's these are fair points. I mean, they're not off. I think, but the problem that I see is that if and I've seen it with the situation we're going to talk about today is everyone will say we want this self-sovereign currency, but if you see a problem, wait for the government to step in. Don't say, don't do anything, don't say anything, wait for the government. We can't do that. We can't have both sides of that conversation. I think we have to step up and have, some real deep conversations when we see problems in this space, to understand them and to understand how impactful they are, and how we as participants in this new ecosystem can participate at a really meaningful level to bridge with government, to say, we're smart people, we have skills, we want to grow in this space long term. Let us teach you what we know. Let us bridge that gap and work together, and give us more control over our own space.
because the flip side is otherwise the government comes along and says, "No, you are
Yeah,
not
the
allowed this, and
government.
we are going to do our
Yeah,
damnedest, like we did with gold, to outlaw ownership."
yeah, like we don't want to get micromanaged, and if we don't manage ourselves well, we literally are giving government an excuse to come in and micromanage us, and
Which
that to
is a
me is a no-go, man. That is definitely going in the wrong direction.
And that is a perfect segue
Absolutely.
for us to talk to Rich specifically about the elephant in the room and what kind of inspired all of this. Can I just say as well, I'm very impressed by that glorious beard, man. Well done. I'm sorry I can't
It's
compliment
not as
more on
interesting of
it
a color
likewise.
as yours, but yeah, give me another year to grow this thing out, and I've trimmed it twice since I retired from the military. But yeah, so kind of segue. I mean, this is a great segue, right? Because we're talking about how the government's going to end up reacting. Not just the U.S.
Yeah.
government, governments all over the world are going
Yes.
to react to this industry the way it is right now, right? And one thing that's really important to clarify before we do this transition is that this isn't like some lack of regulation. These regulations are largely there, at least for what we're going to talk about. Yeah, namely, must have an effective anti-money laundering program. But there is no way to interpret that other than what it is, right? So really, what this is boiling down to is not like a lack of regulatory clarity. It's people that are shady, and it's people that think they can get away with it. It's the fact that these companies are really they're scammers themselves. They're
Mm.
experts in getting people to believe, oh, they've had an MSB, so they must be legit. They're experts in getting, social media activity, which is, kind of related to this elephant in the room we're going to be talking about. Doing these giveaways, giving that appearance of, okay, these people are clearly, if they're talking on Twitter, utilizing these Coinflip machines. That must be their customers. That's their volume. They're scammers themselves on that premise. And one thing I have learned, regardless of whether it's, talking about at this point, let's just name the elephant in the room, Coinflip, or just generally anyone that's knowingly engaged in something shady in this industry. The best practice I have seen is to confront them live, because when you can catch them with their pants down and they can't hide behind being able to delegate something to someone on their team or Google the answer, that's when you're really going to find out whether or not they know what they're talking about. So one thing I did way before this is I used to go to conferences, and whenever ICOs did pitches, I would ask the tough questions. I was real popular at conferences, right? I'm fun at parties. Uh, like, hey, what procedures are you utilizing to verify the KYC that you're collecting? And then it became plain to everyone in the room, okay, they're just collecting KYC docs and having their community manager do a visual inspection. Unless that community manager has experience and can run the numbers, there's no point. It's compliance theater. So I've had a
Right, because I
reputation.
think it was when was it OKX or whatever that you had previously was it Harry Potter that you were or something similar?
I love the idea of Harry Potter. I should actually do that one. No, I did a Borat, Taylor Swift, Osama bin Laden, and a couple of others.
Because you're so similar to Taylor Swift, just that bleached blonde, like luscious hair, and I think in that same kind of a vein though, like so the AML and KYC is not specifically to just protect the company, but it is more about protecting the users themselves and preventing them, which is what we're going to get into a little bit about with Coinflip, preventing the end users from being participants in these scams that take place.
That's part of it. I mean, here's the thing though, right? People think of this, like both of you were just talking about, in like binary terms, black or white, anarchy or, fascism, basically, right? And that's not what this is at all. I actually think KYC, for the most part, is entirely overplayed, and in most applications, actually, frankly, I think it's stupid, right? It's compliance theater, and as as you just pointed out for KuCoin, I proved quickly and easily how ineffective their KYC is. Really, regardless of whether it's an exchange or an ATM operator, any cryptocurrency service, what actually matters more than anything else in an effective AML program is looking at the blockchain, right? KYC might bolster in importance if privacy by default was a thing, right? But it's always going to be checks and balances, ebb and flow, right? So as it stands right now, because most blockchains are transparent in nature, KYC is actually a lot less important. And I think that's really important for the audience to understand, is that this isn't saying, oh, Coinflip is just doing all this stuff wrong and the blockchain industry is just a bunch of anarchists. That's not what this is at all. I'm actually largely for less regulation. I just want people to act in the interest of public safety, which I don't think is anyone a reasonable person would disagree with.
And I think that public safety was something that Laura specifically had been talking about, and being that you've been running some of these blockchain and the Berg events and things like that, you were basically saying, look, this is very, like, almost disheartening, because what we're seeing is this kind of just fragrant disregard for any kind of protection and checking up on one another. And I think, Laura, you were saying, like, this isn't the kind of thing that you want to actually get your friends involved in.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly, this idea of BTMs having no chain analysis, it honestly never even occurred to me as a possibility, because I do look at them as, a money service business. And, just like I would assume all money service businesses would have to know where their money's going, and look at that. And so, yeah, I mean, it definitely gave me a pause, because I did not realize I didn't realize the size of this problem, frankly.
So, talking specifically about MSBs, money servicing businesses, I believe is the what that stands for. The idea being that an entity, a company, would have a license of some description. You would presume that somebody of authority has come along and reviewed their business practices and things like that. And so perhaps we should talk a little bit more about Coinflip, because that was one of the things that you I think it was, you had about half a tweet's worth, and you basically said, I've discovered it's a sham. A lot of it's going to Nigeria, and there was 3 or 4 other things there, Rich, as well. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, and about specifically what the problem here is that you've identified with Coinflip?
Absolutely. So I think the MSB thing is a good segue there, which is that's all part of, and this isn't, by the way, isolated to Coinflip. Other companies do this. They are just an incredibly strong example. They mislead people by thinking, oh, well, MSB, that must mean they're legitimate. It's a license, right? I can get a business right now, as many LLCs as I want in Pittsburgh. It doesn't make it a legitimate business, right? It's the same thing, actually, ironically, that a lot of these investment scammers do when they have these investment scam websites, is they'll do like a company registration somewhere, and it's all an anonymous team, but we're legitimate because we have a registration, right? It's the exact same con trick, ironically, that the scammers that are directing people to their machines are using. I mean, I didn't even realize that until now, but that's actually hilarious.
We have a business. We're legitimate. You can trust us, and just don't look at the skeletons in the closet. Like,
exactly. But
the
thing is with that is that, they can try all they may to pretend like this is some kind of complicated issue, or this isn't industry standard, but it is. And this isn't even stuff that's like specific to our industry. This is just frankly common sense, and they've twisted the reality in a way where that common sense is swept under the rug. Imagine if a bank did not look at their transactions at all whatsoever for the majority of the time they were in business. I mean, that would be on mainstream news. That would be, I can't even comprehend something like that happening. And that's not to say banks are clean. Of course they're not. But If we want this industry to be taken seriously, this can't go on. I mean, this is 2021. We are not in 2014 anymore. This is insane.
We've been doing this now for over a decade. You'd think we'd know a thing or two by now about. Well, I guess that brings us to specifically what it is that you are good at. Some of your skills is that it's possible to see, especially on public ledger blockchains like Bitcoin, like DigiByte, for example, where this is going, because you can see the input UTXOs, you can see where they're being sent to. Do you want to talk a little bit about that kind of aspect of things and how that plays into the... Is negligence going to be the right word? The intentional... I'll let you finish that, I suppose.
Sure. So I'm most well known, I would suppose, besides being a dick on Twitter, for blockchain analysis, which is looking what's on the blockchain. And the thing is with that is that while the work that my company does is generally for a lot of the more sophisticated cases, DPRK hacks and that sort of thing, that same type of blockchain analysis, and a lot of times the same tools, are not just utilized by investigators, whether those investigators are with government or a company like mine. They're used by compliance professionals with cryptocurrency companies as part of their compliance program, right? That's actually a core part of what these tools are designed and function to do. Because unless you can actually see, here's where the funds are going, or think of it like the bank, right? It's going somewhere, it's named. That's the cryptocurrency equivalent. The reason why I said 2014 in particular, you're right. I mean, we've been at this for over a decade now. But one thing in particular that the Coinflips CEO had said is that it's not quite industry norm to have one of these tools. And that is just outright BS. Like, outright BS. It is impossible to have an effective AML program if you can't even look at where the money's going. If all you're seeing in front of you is a series of letters and numbers and it's meaningless to you, how can you realistically say you're reviewing the transactions, right? And the thing is with all this is that having one of these tools, an industry norm for years now, and under the most generous of terms. I would say it has been an industry norm since at least 2017.
Well, because when did Mt. Gox happen? What, 2014? When did that happen?
Sounds about right.
That was everyone's
13?
wake-up call was, shit went wrong. Here is a way that we can all basically not prevent this so much, but find out more about where it's gone and that kind of thing. And that kind of really, I believe, was the starting point for a lot of the analytics that we find that goes on the blockchain, given that it is all public and fully transparent. So do you want to talk very briefly, I suppose, about what's happened with Coinflip and why the two of you are both so motivated to bring about change?
So here's the kind of hook here, right? I mentioned earlier that the type of analysis that we do, we being my company, on the more sophisticated cases, that's complicated. That takes people with a lot of experience and access to oftentimes proprietary tools. But the level of experience needed to just open up really any of these tools, right? And look at, it's really a matter for the majority of them of just typing in Coinbase or Coinflip or whatever, plugging it in. It is turnkey level. You add the addresses into your investigation map or whatever the tool is, and you can see on a high level where all the funds are going. This isn't like, super sophisticated defeating mixers, all that crazy stuff my company's known for. This is turnkey. This is push button.
Because so you can actually, if memory serves me right, you go and there are a bunch of effectively off-the-shelf products that you can subscribe to as like a software as a service for, I think some of it's as low as like $100 a month or something. Some of the really
I'll say this: you have a good range of options when it comes to these tools. I will say that in terms of effectiveness right now, Chainalysis is leading the pack. Now, that's not to say that you have to have Chainalysis to be a compliant business, but you do have to have one of these tools. And generally speaking, the other thing when it comes to ATMs in particular, compliance has to be the #1 expense for that risky of a type. And that is that's not according to me, by the way. That's according to former general counsel for CoinSource. That's according to multiple ATM operators that are compliant. That is the norm. It is the norm for the largest expense to be compliance, the largest team to be compliance. And when it is obvious, in Coinflip's example, that their CCO, that's apparently not even working there anymore, that used to be a pancake server as his only job experience before that. Are you kidding me? That's your chief compliance officer? No. At their scale, they need to have an entire team of at least a dozen folks doing that. It is insane to think that having no compliance tool and a pancake server CCO constitutes an effective AML program. That's insane.
So perhaps now's a good opportunity for me to bring in Laura. Do you want to give us like a rundown of what it is specifically? Like, let's start at the beginning. What is it that Coinflip have been not doing? What is it that you have found out?
Well, I'll just give you a little background. So they, the CEO Daniel came to our Zoom meetup, and I, didn't know anything about anything. Again, I was like, they've got an MSB license. They've been around for 5 years, 1,800 machines, 46 states. I'm sure everything's coolio, whatever. I wasn't expecting anything, too outrageous to happen. And Rich was on that call. And when Rich started questioning him about their AML practices, I mean, it got tense. I mean, Rich is I don't want to be on the other side of Rich's questions. It got tense for sure, but it was a problem that he was watching for a while. So he had an opportunity to ask a question, like you said, one that most people don't think to ask. I will never not ask this question again if I'm talking to somebody who is dealing with cryptocurrencies and fiat. I will never not ask this question again. What is your, how are you protecting your customers? I mean, really, that's what it is. How are you protecting your customers? And I know that they have some front end, they have a call center, and they have some front end things that got, that would get flagged because there are, people on that phone. But the problem is that's not the back end, like he was saying. When you say we've never looked at the blockchain in the entire time that we've been open, even when I heard it, I really, my jaw dropped because I was like, what did he just say? Like I didn't understand. And in fact, when I got off the call, I had to do some research because I was like, I don't think I heard that right. And so that was the big problem, He also said some other things that were bothersome in the fact that, like you can get, crypto in New York by getting someone in New Jersey to buy it for you, stuff like that I was like, this is the CEO of one of the largest BTMs in the country. And he's in a public forum speaking to our community, suggesting that they break the law. And I mean, honestly, the call was really kind of surreal for me. And frankly, I was a little mad at Rich, honestly. And we had a talk just because, yeah, I mean, but I understand why he did. I do understand why he did what he did, but because I was mad because I said, so you knew these guys there was something wrong and you let us bring them into our community, because to me, a meetup is kind of a sacred space. It's where you build a community. It's where you help each other learn. And I didn't understand what was going on completely. It took me a couple of days to really wrap my head around it. But that to me, I hope one thing that we get out of this is, meetups are powerful. And I've been running meetups for 3 years. And the reason I started doing that was because of these exact reasons. I want to be able to host people. I want there to be a broad audience of community members, and you don't know their background, and they can ask good questions, and you can learn. And sometimes it does get uncomfortable, especially in this situation when it turns out the questions expose fraud.
Yep.
So and it's a very uncomfortable place.
Really good that we should potentially come back to, but I wanted to specifically ask. So, Rich, you mentioned in all of about, I think you said it was 2 minutes, looking at one address or something similar, you managed to find out funds were going off to not only Nigeria but a bunch of other things. Do you want to quickly summarize what it was that you'd found out?
Sure, and I should start by clarifying, I looked at a lot more than one address. So Coinflip is one of the only companies that doesn't have what's called attribution, which is basically an inventory of labeled addresses, not just within Chainalysis, but multiple other tools, right? And the only other time I had seen that before was with a company called BitRefill, where they refuse to confirm or deny. Can y'all still hear me? By the way, I heard my headset kind of having an issue there.
Yeah, I can hear you.
There
It
we
just
go.
sounds a
Sounds
little
like
different.
Windows just plugged it back in again.
Yep, sorry about that. One of my pets managed to go underneath the desk. They're out of control. I apologize for that.
It's
But
fine.
the only other time I had experienced something like that was with a company called Bitrefill that had refused to even identify, hey, this wallet address does or does not belong to us. I had never experienced that before, and there was an article on CoinDesk where that was associated with a child sexual exploitation material investigation. So it goes to show that degree of non-cooperative nature right out of the gate is a red flag. Despite Coinflip's best efforts to not have their addresses in these analysis tools, I managed to break that because I've done some transactions on just about all of these ATMs at this point. Plus, I've had people sending me their addresses. I did some backtracing, and I've got the majority, if not all, of Coinflip's addresses. And that took me, even that analysis, just mere minutes to do. I just needed some people that could add on to the few purchases I did at Coinflip in the past and just traced it backwards from there, right? And what that enabled me to do was find most, if not all, of Coinflip's addresses. And then from there, like I mentioned, it's literally turnkey. It is one click and you can see high level, here's where the funds go. And the majority of funds are going not just as per CipherTrace's report that they had put out last year, saying that 88% of ATM funds go offshore. But specifically with Coinflip, I was seeing Binance, and then I looked at the deposit addresses, and it was all ATM exposure and African exchanges, and then just African exchanges from there. Luno, My Patricia, Remitano, and so on. So there's no legitimate explanation for that. And what was really baffling about this call, and this is why I think Laura understood why I took the approach I did, is that when the Coinflip CEO was asked about this, he actually went on the record to suggest that the majority of his volume is remittance payments. I don't think that's likely.
Yeah, I
And
can't
just
think of a single industry where you need to go to an ATM for remittance.
well,
Especially like as a norm.
It's
and
a hardly inefficient business model.
can
Sorry,
you?
Laura, I'll let you speak
I
there.
just want to, because this is the point. We've had this conversation a couple of times with a couple of different people, and since this is a new audience that's going to be seeing this, Rich, can you explain again what remittance payments are?
Sure. So in the simplest terms, remittance payments is the act of sending funds back to, for example, your family back home. So let's say you're an expat living in the country, you're working there, you want to send back money to your family. That would be a remittance payment or an example of one, right? So basically what the Coinflip CEO was trying to suggest was that legitimately the majority of the volume going through his machines are remittance payments to Africa. I think that's pretty unlikely.
It would be interesting if it was just theirs. You know why theirs as opposed to alternative ATMs. Very very suspect right from the get go for sure. Given that other ATMs don't specifically have that larger volume of remittance. Surely, if there is a con artist, and this is potentially something worth watching, if anybody hasn't yet, Mark Rober is a YouTuber who is famous for a bunch of things. He's an ex-NASA person, and he used to do a glitter bomb for package thieves. And as part of this, what he's done is very, very recently, I think it was actually only a week or two ago, he made another video that specifically looks at these remittance payments that are going on, and they are effectively scams that target not just the elderly, but specifically vulnerable and non-technical people, and they basically con them into giving them a whole lot of money. So,
And I hate to interrupt you, but I could not be happier that you're mentioning Mark Rober in particular. I love that guy. I love his videos. I love
yeah.
what he does. Not just with the glitter bombs, but the fact that he did glitter bombs plus mules. I mean, that is like
Yes.
two of my favorite things. That video made my day. But
I
yeah,
was
so
watching that, and my first thought was, I have a feeling Rich has probably seen this, but I need to tweet about it anyway, just in
my
case.
girlfriend blew my stuff up the moment that was published. She was like, "You have to watch this. This is totally you." But I'm so glad you mentioned that because it discusses mules, right? And that's another
Yes.
issue with these ATMs. And I say these ATMs, by the way, because Coinflip isn't the only non-compliant one. They're just by far the worst. But the other major issue, or one of the other major issues with these ATMs, is that they're also used for mules, right? So what ends up happening, exactly like in that Mark Ruber video, is these people get scammed and then there's mules involved, or like these older folks that get taken in the romance scams, they get scammed for everything they had. And then these scammers end up using them as money mules. And you could see this, right? I've investigated multiple business email compromises and other thefts where these ATMs and old folks are utilized as money mules. It is so obvious what's going on the blockchain.
Yeah. And so I think that kind of that sort of this is one of the things that we're looking to avoid is we don't want this kind of thing in our industry. We need to self-police. And one of the difficult things, though, like Laura's mentioned, is that in this instance, she was initially mad at you for letting Coinflip come along and talk to their broader community. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Laura? Because obviously Coinflip is something that, especially being that this is DigiByte and Friends, the DigiByte community were interested in Coinflip ATMs. How can we protect ourselves in that kind of an instance? And what do you have to say about, I suppose, like, what are your thoughts for other influencers and how they manage to get them on board and promote themselves?
I mean, honestly, I think that there's just there was a lot of history with the company. And like I said, they had an MSB. And for me, I thought that's a difficult thing to do. I thought that you had to go through a lot of checks and balances and people were checking behind you. And, that was a stressful thing to get and hard to keep. That was what I was thinking. And so I can see how everybody else would be thinking that too. I mean, I had never even heard this as an issue before, that meeting. So I think, for us, as just people in the space, just to understand that, just because it looks okay doesn't mean, and you want to, be included, or you want to be on that platform or on this platform. I mean, I understand now the need to really have like a more of a community action group to help really like suss out things and ask good questions. And it's not to say, you want to put everybody out of business, but you want to be able to say, okay, we've researched this. This is what we've seen. This is a problem we've seen. How can you fix it? You know what I mean? Like we want to help. We want to work with them. I don't, if they're not doing something that needs to be done, we need to educate ourselves on that. And then we need to talk with these companies and say, what can you do, to keep people safe? And so one of the things we're working on, there's a group of people that are working on a neighborhood watch, a crypto neighborhood watch. And it came out of this situation because that was the thing I learning through all of this, and Rich has, been very patient because I ask a ton of questions, but, we don't have enough people with that skill set that he is talking about to help us. And we need that. And so, part of that initiative will be, like finding good programs that people can take and finding out what's going on, not just with like ATMs and BTMs and that kind of thing, but, just in the space in general. What are some of the things to watch out for, especially we're about to have an influx of new people. And if we don't provide a support system where it's not all just about, NFTs and, what's the price today and, DeFi and it's blah, blah, blah. It's there's a lot happening. And so all, this kind of stuff really falls through the cracks, and it did make me realize we need to band together as a agnostic crypto community to say, those of us that are interested in looking and researching and talking with, leaders in the industry to find out, like, what do we need to be asked? What questions do we need to even ask? Like, these are really important. And I think that that's hopefully something good that will grow out of this, because this has been a really, it's been hard to process for a lot of people. A lot of people are still like, I can't process this. Like, I don't believe Rich, I don't understand this. Like, this is not possible.
I believe you, Rich. It's okay, man.
I mean, if he would change his Twitter profile, he'd help me a whole lot. No, I'm just kidding.
To build off of everything Laura's saying here is that ultimately what this is boiling down to is that people have a choice. You care more about the price now, or you care more about the price. The price obsession is the thing, right? And I wish that the obsession was the tech. It's not to say it's mutually exclusive either. It could be both. But if you're so short-sighted that all you care about is the price and you're uncomfortable with making this industry what it needs to be for mass adoption, do you, boo? But you're not going to be relevant to us or anyone else that's relevant in the long term. What ultimately is going to matter is that you have to look at how our industry is perceived, and not just by government. If people's only interaction with cryptocurrencies, or specifically with Bitcoin, is, oh yeah, that's the thing that was used on me to get scammed once, that leaves a horrible impression, and that is not conducive to mass adoption, right? Like Laura was saying, there's a whole wave of newcomers, and then you factor that in with the fact that these machines, even before COVID, were utilized heavy for this. You have a pandemic, you have a bunch of bored and lonely people that are already, likely to be scam victims. So you're just pouring kerosene into that dumpster fire. And then we're not going to, as a community, rise up and do something about it. When plainly what's going on with Coinflip, because the majority of their volume is clearly fraudulent, what that company is, in the simplest terms possible, is a company that is largely and knowingly, by their own admission at this point, facilitating these remittance payments, aka scams, right? So Coinflip, in the simplest terms, is really just a company that takes a 7% cut from scams. That is their business. The blockchain does not lie about that. And if the community doesn't want to do something about that, unfortunately, we might be a few more years away from that mass adoption and maturity we all want.
Yeah, and I think that was something that you actually mentioned, was that you'd ascertained it was somewhere around about 85 to 90% or something were remittance payments.
Which, ironically, by the way, is not far removed from what CipherTrees had looked into them, not them specifically, but ATMs broadly, last year. And as per their report, they said 88% of funds go offshore. So I'm not the only one that's looked at it.
That's a lot of money going offshore, and I think as well, going back to what Laura had specifically mentioned, is that this is not specifically just about us taking out bad guys or whatever, preventing scams, which is good, obviously, don't get me wrong, but about creating an environment where I would feel comfortable with, for example, my mother or my grandparents' participation in, knowing that they are not going to be immediately scammed out of money. Especially as you grow older, you head towards retirement, you're likely to have some kind of retirement fund come in. Having that money taken away from you through these scams is unfortunately a lot easier than it should be, and we need to, like you were saying before, self-police so that we don't endanger those of us who are most vulnerable.
And I'll answer that for you in a way that I think the community will really appreciate. When it comes to the self-policing, we have a choice here and now as an industry where we can get these companies like Coinflip to take the simple, and I mean simple steps. Get one of these tools, an effective one, and actually use it, because having one of these tools doesn't make you any more compliant than being in a garage makes you a car, right? And in the simplest terms possible, all that means is have this tool and implement common sense measures. Restrict transactions to, Luno, Binance, MyPatricia. Prompt a customer call. If it's a legitimate transaction, it can go through, and that's like 5 minutes of overhead. If it's not a legitimate transaction, guess what? You just save someone from getting scammed. It's that simple. And these companies can either do that, or what's going to end up happening is all this buzz about, KYC on self-custodial wallets. I mean, like, that's insane. I don't ever want to see that. But the people that are pushing for that, they're being provided an argument to push for that because the industry doesn't want to do the right thing.
And let's be honest, 7% of $10,000 is $700. They're going to make some decent money off of that. They can afford to pay for a 5-minute phone call to a mobile number. It's not going to break the bank.
They can afford for that.
There's margin.
They can afford for their marketing. They pay particular people, and I'm not referencing anyone in particular. It's just a known thing if you look at their Twitter. They can pay for that, but they can't pay for a compliance tool, right? They just recently apparently got some. By the way, that's a point I didn't finalize earlier, but the reason I confronted the Coinflip CEO on the call was that I got him on the record saying exactly that. Instead of, if he was emailed about it, what he would have done is said, oh shit, I need to do something to pretend I'm being compliant, and then purchased one of these, cheaper tools, and that whole act, so to kind of clarify on that. But yeah, I mean, just across the board, this is not something that's freaking rocket surgery to fix. I mean, like, even at Coinflip scale, if they got one of these tools, I could train them in 90 minutes on how to solve these issues. This is not some complicated thing. It's just a choice they made. They are knowingly lining their pockets with largely elder scam proceeds, and it's sickening.
And the hard part is as well is that you're right as well when it comes to a lot of the price talk, and we see this as well from a lot of people who are pushing that kind of thing. And it's not that price in and of itself is a bad thing, not at all, But when you are like 90% is look at what the price is today, look at what it could be tomorrow. Look at what it is today, look at what it could be tomorrow. That speaks more volumes about your own intent. And I think you're right where you mentioned before specifically, like price in and of itself is not a bad thing. Everybody's, it'd be great to be able to put in $1,000 and buy yourself some Bitcoin and then buy a Lambo with it tomorrow. Nobody's denying that. That sounds lovely. We should all have Lambos. Let's all drive, But, or Teslas now, because Tesla are now accepting Bitcoin. But when it comes at the expense of other people that have been basically scammed, and they are the ones who are buying it and pumping up the price, you are effectively relying on a scam yourself, and you're participating in that. And that's not something that I think that we should be proud of. I think that we can ourselves, as a broader industry, self-police.
Said differently, if you want your $1,000 in Bitcoin to buy you a Lambo one day, we need as an industry to achieve mass adoption. We're not going to achieve that mass adoption if all Bitcoin is known for is, oh, well, that's the thing my grandmother or grandfather got scammed with, right? We're not going to get there if the government is largely, or I shouldn't say largely, but decision makers in government are even in a position at all whatsoever to question whether or not society is responsible enough to do self-custodial wallets. I mean, we're so far removed from that reality of price appreciation until we address these things, right? So these people, even if all they care about is price, I think that the term they like to use is zoom out, zoom freaking out. Look at the big picture here and look at what matters.
And that's a difficult thing, I guess. Because, like you said before, a lot of people don't know to specifically ask these kinds of questions. So if we were to start to wrap this up, what sort of questions should people be asking, not just from ATM providers, but from service providers in general? What do the community need to be doing from here to progress?
I wish I could give you a one-size-fits-all on that. That's actually a tough question. In fairness, it might not even be strategic for them to say necessarily what their compliance tool is. I don't think across the board that's a consideration now, but I could see in niche situations how that wouldn't be strategic in the future. So I want to flag that as a future consideration, because otherwise that might not apply 2 to 3 years from now. That all being said, I think high level what they can discuss is statistics. Here is the percent that we spend relative to everything else on compliance, right? And if they are not willing to, from a business and a security sense, they might not give you a byline report, but if they can't talk about that on a high level, something's up. Or perhaps even more simply, if anyone's able to get into a situation where they're asking the CEO of a company, what tool do you use? And he just has no idea what you're talking about, or he just says a range of things that just don't make any sense at all whatsoever. That's kind of the stuff you got to look for. You also got to look at, baseline level, what would be the actual use cases for these things, right? It's pretty plain what the use for a cryptocurrency exchange is, right? But who actually uses cryptocurrency ATMs? Right? People aren't even thinking at that step. Do people really think that the people on Twitter engaging in these Coinflip giveaways are Coinflip's daily customers? Do people really think that those people are the ones that are constituting this immense amount of volume that by Coinflip's own admission they have? Of course not. That's not something a reasonable person. So I would say that's your starting point. Look at what they're talking about insofar as volume. Look at what they're talking about and seeing if it makes any sense. And try to find out, does this business make any sense? Or, is something amiss here insofar as how they've grown so quickly? Is something nefarious at play? That could apply for things outside of ATM operators too, which is why I gave that example.
Yeah, and I think, Rich was saying in a earlier interview that I was listening to, what kind of gave him a heads up to look at Coinflip and other BTM operators was the expansive growth, during this time. And it just, like you said, it doesn't really make common sense. And I also want to preface this with, I'm not against these machines. I'm not like we should ban all these machines. I don't believe that. I think that's, we can swing in the other direction way too hard, and overcorrect. But I think we need to really think thoughtfully, why do we have 14,000 machines and the UK have like 226? I think we need to really thoughtfully look at the scale of those numbers. And like he was saying, does that make sense? Like, I'm all for everybody having access to crypto, but in a responsible way, in a way that doesn't weaponize it. And I will say this one thing, and I'll try not to cry. But this has been a really hard month. I saw a part of this industry that I never knew existed. And one of the people that has been researching along with me during this horrible, because I wanted to know, what are the scams? How does this work? Who are they hurting? And so we had both been researching it. And he was in a class, and it talked about elderly people in healthcare. And the person teaching the class said, two things keep them alive: their medicine and their iPhone or their iPad. And so to think that it can be used in that way, it breaks my heart. It breaks my heart that it's our industry that's doing that. And I know people say banks are worse. They are bad, but I'm not a banker. You know, the banks aren't what I'm trying to promote. And when I got this realization that for 3 years I've been volunteering in this industry to try to bring it forward, to try to get people involved, to ask questions, you know, to participate, and to realize it was used this way, it was very hard. So I'm sorry I got emotional. It's just, it was a hard realization that, you know, certain technology is weaponized in that way. And I know I'm not so naive to know that it doesn't happen. I just didn't realize that. I mean, I'm part of the problem. You know, I was
I'll
promoting.
disagree with you on that. You're not part of the problem. The thing is that these companies like Coinflip, they're scammers themselves. They mislead very well-intentioned and people with their pure hearts, such as yourself, into believing they're doing the right thing. But you know what ends up happening, and really what defines somebody's character, is that when you peel the layer of the onion back, and that after that first layer, you see what's going on, and it's that obvious. You have a choice to make then and now as to what you want this industry to be defined by. And if you are not going to be willing to do the right thing, then that's an entirely different approach, right? I think really what matters here is that whether it's either of you or just broadly, I think despite all of the really horrifying type of stuff that we case sometimes, you know, child exploitation cases and just the real nastiness of the world, I've still at least maintained my faith in the common good of people. And I think once that people are educated about what's going on, they'll take the appropriate actions. And I think combining that with the fact that across the board, I think it's fair to say that we all want blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies to succeed. When we discover that this is going on, we have to police it ourselves, right? This is the kind of thing where, you know, a very common misconception about what I do or what companies like mine do. I love Monero. I think Monero is awesome. Fluffy Pony, I'm like his hugest simp, right?
Yay.
That guy's awesome. But yeah, here's kind of the amazing thing, right?
Especially his
This doesn't
wall
mean
that
we
he's
have to
got behind
regulate
him,
into
right,
the
in his
ground.
videos.
There's a cryptocurrency ATM operator that has Monero locally in Pittsburgh, and there have been minimal issues with that relative to Bitcoin, right? So it's not like privacy is bad thing or any of that. No, this is a very simple situation, right? When you look at the scale of what in particular certain ATM operators' machines are being used for on the blockchain, which is plain, and the majority is going to Africa, and you combine the other factors like Laura was talking about, they have grown like 3x per year since 2014. That's not from legitimate use, right? I think all of us can agree on something, which is we want to see this industry, or more accurately, the utilization of cryptocurrencies grow to that scale legitimately, but that's not legitimate growth. And if that is something that we're going to tolerate, we are going to be, if not years, potentially decades behind on adoption. And that's a tragedy. And to Laura's point, this is not just about our industry or caring about price either. This is just about being a good human being. This should get people emotional. This should get people angry when it is this plain. That's what's going on. This is a risk to public safety.
Yeah.
I think that's probably a really good point there. Sorry, I'll let you speak, Laura.
Well, I was just gonna say, you know, it's really uncomfortable. to know this and to try to make decisions on what to do next once you know certain things, and I just, I know I can be a better communicator. I was in a state of shock. Every day I learned something new that horrified me. And I'm not saying that hyperbolically. Like truly I was, I didn't have a dark side of the night of the soul. I had a black night of the soul. And it was hard to process it. But as hard as that is, and as painful as that is, because you have to really go back and look at your own actions and say, how did I help get us here? We have to do it. We have to look at our own participation, and we have to know, like, is what we're doing, are we doing something for a good mass adoption or a bad mass adoption? Because all tech, there's nothing wrong with Bitcoin. Bitcoin's fine. Bitcoin is just a technology. We choose whether we build a hospital or a bomb with it. And ignoring problems like this, we're building a great big bomb for our children, for our communities, for our physical communities. And that was the thing that really struck me was, it's one thing. I've been scammed. I allowed myself to be scammed on Telegram. I allowed myself to be scammed. Like I lost money and it hurt. I got a ding to my ego, but I wasn't physically harmed. When we have physical machines in our communities, that means that we have another level of participation. People can be physically harmed or harm themselves. I mean, one thing I watched the ATII panel that Rich was on, and I highly suggest everybody watch that if you want to link it down below, Josiah. But it really talks about in depth, these different ways that, people are frauded. And one of the things they said was, a lot of these are not even reported because they're embarrassed. They're lonely, they got taken, and they're embarrassed. I was embarrassed when I got scammed. I was so embarrassed. But I told my story because I wanted other people to not do what I did, but, I've read some pretty horrible victim stories, and these are real people we're talking about. This isn't just like, oh, what's the big deal? I mean, people are really hurting from this technology in a way that I really never even knew could happen.
I want to give a couple of examples, by the way, of what Laura's talking about, which is there's two different leagues of getting scammed, right? There's people that might get scammed for a little bit for like, oh, oops, I was newer into this. I sent a small amount of money to that Twitter, I'll 10x your Bitcoin thing, or maybe a few grand from somebody impersonating someone on Telegram. That's one tier, and it stings and it's a blow to someone's ego, but people recover and they move on, right? The whole other tier of that, especially when it comes to elder fraud, is that these are scams that can go on for years and will drain people's entire life savings or money that they don't even have, or they're borrowing money from friends to make up for it. These scammers will tell these old folks or these lonely folks, lie to your relatives about what this is for. They'll get in debt. It is crazy the amount of money these people will lose, and people have taken their lives over this. This is a serious issue. This is destroying lives. This is destroying families. And what's just really egregious about all this is that it is so simple in terms of complexity from an investigative lens. I mean, you're seeing funds directly to one of these exchanges, and it's just so obvious. If these companies looked, at the blockchain and were to see funds going to Nigerian exchange, customer that's over 65 years old, where it just is very unlikely to be a remittance payment. This is like mere minutes of effort type of stuff, right? And they just let this go on, and they let it go on and on and on until they have nothing left. And it's just lives getting ruined, and they know this too at this point. That was the whole reason why I did what I did, and I went after that CEO live, is that I knew I wouldn't have that opportunity to make it plain. Okay, they know. And I knew that he knew that for years before that meetup, but now it's on the record. Now he's been confronted. Now the statistics were put in front of his face. He had the graph sent to him with all the addresses and everything. He can take that information and he could either do something with it, or he can continue to line his pockets with it is unarguably, based upon the blockchain, the proceeds of scams. That's choice.
So going from here, I suppose, because there's two things I kind of want to segue to from that is it's not going to be difficult for Coinflip to turn themselves around and become a legitimate business and to get rid of all of this fraud and scams. What would you have to say to them would be the best steps that they could take from here? And second of all, if people are wanting to find out more about this, where should they be following the two of you from here so they can see what happens when this house of cards comes tumbling down?
Well, the best answer for both of those, like Laura had suggested, is to watch that ATII video, because that answers both how can Coinflip, or any company for that matter, actually handle this, right? And I think really a step one is wanting to handle it and not, deliberately running a business that's based upon scam proceeds. So don't hold your breath for Coinflip to do anything. As for everything else, as to learn more about it, I think that same video is a great reference. It gives you, not just from me, but from folks that work within these crypto ATM companies. And I provide advisory to these companies, and I'm really known across all the exchanges and ATMs, but they work with those companies. Yeah, don't take it just from me. Take it from multiple other people that are highly knowledgeable and reputable. As far as watching where the cards come tumbling down, I mean, I'm not going to have a live feed of them getting arrested on my Twitter, but just see what happens. I mean, when you look at the blockchain and you see what you see, and these issues are known at this point, it's out there. And I always use the oyster pearl thing with Bruno Block. If people want to Google that one as an example, I got asked hundreds of times, one arrest. That didn't happen for a while, but something's going to happen. I mean, it is obvious and undeniable. Coinflip has been operating outside of compliance, and there's going to be consequences for that.
So if people would like to follow the two of you, if they'd like to find out more about Blockchain of the Berg, if they'd like to find out more about specifically following you, Laura, where can people find you? Rich, where can people find you?
I'm on LT Loves Digi. I actually stepped off Blockchain of the Berg just, with all of this. I just, I'm going to have to take a whole step back after this is all said and done. We are... there are some of us on Twitter that are asking Coinflip to unplug, unplug until you can get your compliance straight. Like if you can just get your compliance straight, like that's all I care about. Honestly, that's all I care. Just unplug until it's fixed. Simple as that.
Looking after people, right?
Like, that we can check that it's fixed. That Rich can run a transaction tomorrow, and he can say, "Yep, they've changed the way they're doing stuff." Instead of running transactions and going, nope, still the same, nope, still the same, nope, still the same. As long as it's the same, we've got to want better for our industry. We've got to want better for our physical communities, and especially for the people that are the prey of this. And one other thing I want to add about this while I was doing my research was, when you go, and again, any of these that are non-compliant, you can go on their maps on their website. So if you're somebody who's a scammer, if you're someone looking for a victim, you can drill it down to their zip code. You have a map of where to send them to their zip code. So if you're casing somebody on Facebook, little old lady on Facebook, find out what her zip code is, find the closest non-compliant ATM to send her to, and know that it will be sent to your address no matter what. I mean, it's making it so easy for them, and it's using our industry.
I want to add one very important point on that too. Laura mentioned something really critical, and I know we're trying to wrap up here, but this is something that's important for the health of our industry, which is that these scammers do know how easy it is to go online and direct these victims to one of the ATMs. And specifically, what's ending up happening is that they're directing them to the non-compliant ones. This is something that's much more recent than I'm starting to observe over the past few months, meaning that they're not going to be as likely to send their fraud victim to, let's say Digital Mint or Freedom Gateway or CoinSource. They will actually prefer to send their fraud victims to Coinflip. It is mind-boggling, and just across the board that's an issue, because even if they don't send their scam victim directly to Coinflip and they send them to one of the compliant ATMs, what ends up happening with the compliant ATMs is, because they're looking at the blockchain, because they're looking at their back end and saying, okay, this person is some 78-year-old lady, I think it's incredibly unlikely that she's going to be sending funds to a Nigerian exchange, right? They're taking the action, they're offboarding, and then what ends up happening? that 78-year-old lady is oftentimes going to go to Coinflip. So what is the incentive for the compliant companies, right? They're losing volume. They're spending money on the compliance tools. They're spending more money on the compliance staff, and then they end up making less money where Coinflip just pockets that customer that the compliant operation lost. So that's a huge issue. I wanted to answer the other question you had because I know that you're trying to get that wrapped. So I'm on Twitter. I'm Raindrop Actual. I hate to talk about myself or promote myself, but I didn't want to skirt that question on you.
But I think something that you specifically mentioned earlier on is that a lot of these other influencers who will talk about this will also talk about price, and why we should care about mass adoption. And you mentioned it before, and I think this is a brilliant point, is that the mass adoption won't come while we are allowing ourselves to be hindered so blatantly by these kinds of scams and frauds and things. If people genuinely want mass adoption, they will ask those hard questions, they will ask the tough stuff that needs to be asked, and in which case, yeah, we're going to protect ourselves. We're going to expedite this kind of mass adoption because we won't have, exactly like you said, people specifically just saying, I've heard of Bitcoin, it was how my grandmother got scammed. No one wants to participate in that.
I mean, there's different types of influencers, right? I will say that that's a sign of a budding, mature industry. We're not quite there yet, but yeah, there are influencers. I'm not going to name names, but it'll become super obvious if you scroll through their feed and all they talk about is either the price or just this generic kind of follow farming. Have fun staying poor. I told you Bitcoin's price was going to go up. Bitcoin solve this. Just generic regurgitating buzzwords. Those are the ones that make a living off of referral links. Nothing in life is free. If something's free, you're the product. And if that's their shtick and they want to make a living off of referral links and follow farming because they take pictures of their Lambos and contribute nothing of value to the industry, do you, boo. But those are going to be the people that are not relevant in 5 years. Look for the influencers that are actually talking about relevant topics: solvency, transparency, AML, actual use cases. If the influencer that you're looking about cannot talk in an educated way about any of those topics, and all they talk about is just price and just this generic buzzwording, I actually need to make a list at this point because it's the same buzzwords they regurgitate and then just the same kind of lazy follow farming, right? If that's all they are, okay, do you follow them? If you want to use their BlockFi affiliate link or whatever else, enjoy getting wrecked in the future. Or you can follow people that actually talk about things that matter. You can compare this to a lot of other industries, by the way. When people invest in stocks, they actually look into the company. They care about the future of it. They want to see more adoption. Not that Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrency is a stock, but you look at historical precedent, and it really goes to show how much maturing we still have to do.
I think that's a really good place for us to start to wrap this up. Is there anything else that the two of you would like to add in terms of both specifically talking about Coinflip, about chain analysis, or about what we as an industry ourselves can do to further ensure that we don't have that heavy-handed regulation that nobody wants?
I think we just, I think we have to be a community. We're compartmentalized even in different projects and different mindsets, but we have a commonality that we have to have clean networks to build on top of. If we want to build long term, we can't. I kind of equate it to, you can't build a healthy country off of slavery and genocide. You can't build a healthy industry off of people who are openly fraudulent and really unapologetically building industry off of victims. We can't. It's a terrible. We can't start with that seed, and we are starting with that seed. And I think I didn't understand that seed existed until a month ago. And so we've got to really look and say, what are we building off of? What is our foundational layer there? And we've got to take it seriously. I mean, I want it to be fun too. I used to be fun. Remember, Josiah, when I used to be fun? I want it to be fun too. But we got to get that serious level down. Security, safety, reputation as an industry. We have to focus on these things, all of us. Unless you just plan on making that, Bitcoin go up and cashing out into fiat and saying, see you later, suckers. That was fun. that's not what I want. You know, that's not what a lot of my friends want.
I want a better future for tomorrow. I want, ideally one day, myself, I would personally love for my future kids, that I don't actually have yet, to be able to sit down with me, you know, like grab them and sit on my lap and be like, hey, Dad, tell us about that time that you were involved with Bitcoin and DigiByte back in, 2021 sort of thing. Like, tell us about the stories and things. Because, shit, we're going to have some good stories the rate we're going, right? Like,
Your stories are going to be a lot better than, well, I looked on CoinMarketCap at DigiByte's price every single day, and I did nothing else of value besides shove referral links down people's throats, right? You're actually going to be able to talk about, yeah, I was part of a awakening in this industry. That's really what this is, right? We need a freaking awakening. If we want to see that mass adoption, we need to rise up, and we need to rise up now. So you're going to have a better story for those young ones one day, as opposed to some of these folks where the peak of their careers is going to be posting a car on Twitter and getting a bunch of people that think they're financial geniuses to follow them and make a living off of referral links, when in reality they threw a dart and won back in 2016.
I think that's probably a really good place for us to wrap this up. Thank you both so much. This is about being part of that awakening. This is something that's exciting. This is something that we should be energized by and enthusiastic for what it is that we can see and the change that we can make in not just protecting people, but also in maintaining that libertarian value and really seeing this entire blockchain space go and be taken to the next level. So thank you both so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being on this episode of DigiByte and Friends. Thank you once again. Hope you have a fantastic evening, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks,
Cheers.
everyone.
Thanks.